Donald Trump stepped out of the black limousine at Buckingham Palace, adjusting his red tie and looking up at the massive gates. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, written on cream-colored paper with gold lettering that caught the light perfectly. "State dinner with His Majesty the King," he muttered to himself, walking toward the entrance. About time they recognized real leadership. His security detail followed closely behind, but they had been briefed extensively about protocol. On British soil, especially at the palace, they were guests, nothing more. The first person Trump encountered was Captain James Morrison of the King's Guard, standing at perfect attention in his red uniform and tall black hat. Morrison had been protecting the royal family for 12 years and had seen every type of world leader imaginable. "You there," Trump called out, pointing at Morrison. "I'm President Trump. You need to salute me." Morrison didn't move a muscle. His eyes stared straight ahead, following centuries of royal protocol that had never been broken. Not for presidents, prime ministers, or anyone else who wasn't part of the British royal hierarchy. "Did you hear me?" Trump stepped closer, his voice getting louder. "I said salute." A small crowd of tourists began gathering nearby, phones coming out to record the interaction. Morrison remained perfectly still, but inside his head he was calculating his next move. He had dealt with difficult situations before, but never quite like this. Trump turned to his chief of staff, who was standing uncomfortably nearby. "Tell this guard who I am. Tell him he needs to show proper respect." The chief of staff approached Morrison carefully. "Captain, this is former President Trump. He's here for the state dinner." Morrison finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I understand who the gentleman is, sir. I'm following proper protocol for His Majesty's Guard." "Protocol?" Trump's face was beginning to turn red. "I'm the President of the United States." "Former President, sir," Morrison corrected politely. "And with respect, you're not in the United States right now." The tourists' phones were now openly recording the exchange. Trump noticed the cameras and seemed to realize that this moment was being captured for the world to see. "We'll see about this," he said, turning toward the palace entrance. "Someone's going to hear about this guard's attitude." As Trump walked away, Morrison allowed himself the smallest smile. He had a feeling this evening was going to be very interesting indeed. But what Morrison didn't know was that Trump had already made several phone calls during his flight to London. Calls to people who had promised they could arrange things to make his visit go more smoothly. Inside the palace, preparations for the state dinner were in their final stages. The staff had been briefed about the guest list, the protocols, and the potential complications that might arise. What they hadn't been told was that someone on the inside had been contacted about making sure Trump's visit included certain special accommodations. The real drama was just beginning. Inside Buckingham Palace, word of the confrontation at the gate spread quickly through the staff corridors. Lady Catherine Pemberton, the King's private secretary, received the report while reviewing the evening's seating arrangements. "He demanded a salute from Captain Morrison," she asked, looking up from her papers with raised eyebrows. "Yes, ma'am," replied Thomas Hartwell, the palace's head of security. Morrison handled it perfectly, but the former president seemed quite upset. Lady Pemberton had been managing royal protocol for 15 years. She had seen world leaders try to bend the rules before, but demanding military honors from the King's Guard was a new one. Where is he now? Being escorted to the blue drawing room for pre-dinner reception. "But ma'am, there's something else." Hartwell lowered his voice and stepped closer to her desk. "We received a call yesterday from someone claiming to represent Trump's advance team. They asked about special protocol considerations for his visit." "What kind of considerations?" "They wanted to know if arrangements could be made for military honors, special seating, and what they called recognition appropriate for a sitting head of state." Lady Pemberton felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Please tell me you made it clear he's not a sitting head of state." "Of course, ma'am, but the caller seemed to think money could change protocol. They mentioned substantial donations to various British charities." This was exactly the kind of situation Lady Pemberton had been trained to handle, but it never got easier. Foreign dignitaries who didn't understand that British royal protocol wasn't for sale. Meanwhile, in the blue drawing room, Trump was holding court with several other guests, telling them about his encounter with the guard. Completely unprofessional, he was saying to a group of British business leaders. In America, our military knows how to show respect to leadership. Lord Halifax, a prominent member of Parliament, cleared his throat politely. Mr. Trump, if I may, the King's Guard follows protocol that dates back centuries. They salute members of the royal family and their direct representatives. It's not personal. Everything's personal when you're dealing with respect, Trump replied. I've had military leaders from dozens of countries salute me. This guard was being deliberately disrespectful. What Trump didn't notice was that Captain Morrison had been reassigned to interior security for the evening. He was now standing at attention just outside the blue drawing room, hearing every word of the conversation. Lady Pemberton appeared at Morrison's side, speaking quietly. Captain, His Majesty would like to speak with you privately before dinner. Morrison nodded and followed her down the ornate hallway toward the King's private study. He had served the royal family faithfully for over a decade, but he had never been summoned for a private audience. Morrison, Lady Pemberton said as they walked. What exactly happened at the gate? He demanded I salute him, ma'am. I explained that I follow royal protocol. He seemed to think his former position as American president entitled him to military honors from British forces. And you handled it by the book? Absolutely, ma'am. Though I suspect this won't be the end of it. Lady Pemberton stopped walking and turned to face him. What do you mean? He mentioned that someone would hear about this. It sounded like a threat. As they reached the King's study, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's dinner was going to test more than just his military training. Inside the study, the King was waiting with a concerned expression that Morrison had never seen before. Captain Morrison, we need to talk. King Charles III looked up from his desk as Captain Morrison entered the private study. The room was lined with centuries-old books and portraits of monarchs who had faced their own diplomatic challenges. Sit down, Captain, the King said, gesturing to a leather chair. I understand we had an incident at the gate. Morrison remained standing. Your Majesty, I followed proper protocol. The former president demanded a salute, and I explained that I salute only members of the royal family and their authorized representatives. I'm not questioning your actions, Morrison. I'm concerned about what might happen next. The King walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. We've received some unusual requests through diplomatic channels regarding tonight's dinner. Requests for special honors and protocol adjustments that go well beyond normal courtesy. What kind of requests, Your Majesty? They want me to publicly acknowledge Mr. Trump as if he were still a sitting head of state. They've suggested photo opportunities with military honors, special seating arrangements, and even hinted at some kind of honorary recognition. Morrison felt his jaw tighten. And your response, sir? The same as yours, Captain. We follow our protocols regardless of pressure. The King turned back to face Morrison. But I wanted you to know that this evening may become more challenging than usual. There are forces at work here that go beyond simple diplomatic courtesy. Before Morrison could respond, Lady Pemberton knocked on the door and entered quickly. Your Majesty, we have a problem. The former president has been making phone calls from the blue drawing room. Our security monitoring indicates he's contacted several British tabloid newspapers. What's he telling them? That he's being treated with deliberate disrespect by palace security. He's suggesting that Britain is trying to insult America by refusing proper honors. The King sighed deeply. So he's trying to create an international incident. It appears so, sir. The calls were made to reporters who specialize in royal controversy. They're asking for quotes about British-American relations and whether the palace is making a political statement. Morrison stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may, this is exactly why protocol exists. It prevents these kinds of manipulations.
Quite right, Captain, but now we need to decide how to handle the dinner itself.
Lady Pemberton consulted her notes. The guest list includes several American business leaders and British politicians. If Mr. Trump continues to make this about military respect and national honor, it could become very uncomfortable for everyone. Has he made any other demands? Actually, yes. His staff has requested that Captain Morrison be reassigned away from any duties where Mr. Trump might encounter him. The King's expression hardened. Absolutely not. Captain Morrison performed his duties exactly as required. We don't reassign our security based on guest preferences. But as they spoke, none of them knew that Trump had made one more phone call, this one to a contact who had promised that arrangements could be made to ensure he received the respect he deserved. The dinner was still 2 hours away, but the real game was already being played behind the scenes. "Your Majesty," Morrison said quietly, "I have a feeling tonight's dinner is going to be unlike any we've hosted before." The king nodded grimly. "Captain, I want you personally assigned to security for the dining room. Stay close and be prepared for anything." What none of them realized was that Trump's final phone call had set in motion a plan that would test the very foundations of royal protocol. 2 hours before dinner, Trump's personal assistant received a text message that made her smile for the first time all day. The message was simple: "Package delivered to service entrance. Everything is arranged." She immediately went to Trump's guest suite, where he was getting dressed for the formal dinner. "Sir, I have good news. Your friend came through." Trump looked up from adjusting his cufflinks. "Which friend?" "The one who said he could make arrangements. He's managed to get someone on the palace staff to help with the situation." Trump's face lit up. "I knew it. Money talks, even in these stuffy old palaces." What Trump didn't know was that his friend had actually contacted a tabloid journalist who specialized in embarrassing the royal family. The journalist had convinced a temporary catering staff member to wear a fake palace uniform and create a photo opportunity. The plan was simple. During the pre-dinner reception, the fake staff member would approach Trump and give him an elaborate salute while other guests watched. Photos would be taken, and by morning newspapers would be running stories about how the palace had corrected their treatment of the former president. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison was conducting his final security sweep of the state dining room. The formal table was set for 40 guests, with place cards arranged according to strict diplomatic protocol. "Everything looks perfect," reported Sergeant Williams, Morrison's second in command. "All staff have been verified and background checked." "What about the temporary catering staff?" "All cleared through our normal channels, though there was one last-minute addition. Someone called in sick, and they sent a replacement." Morrison frowned. Last-minute changes always made him nervous, especially on a night like this. "Show me the replacement's documentation." Williams handed him a folder. The papers looked official, but something felt off. The photograph didn't quite match the quality of standard palace employee photos. "Where is this person now?" "Assigned to serve drinks during the pre-dinner reception." Morrison's instincts were screaming at him now. "Williams, I want you to personally locate this individual and bring them to me for verification." But it was too late. In the blue drawing room, guests were already gathering for cocktails before dinner. The temporary staff member, wearing a perfect replica of a palace uniform, was moving through the crowd with a tray of champagne. Lady Pemberton was greeting guests when she noticed something odd. One of the servers was paying unusual attention to Trump's location, always positioning himself nearby. She caught Morrison's eye across the room and nodded toward the server. Morrison began moving casually in that direction. That's when the server made his move. "Mr. President," he called out in a voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Sir, I've been instructed to present you with proper honors." The room began to quiet as guests turned to watch. Phones started coming out of pockets and purses. The fake server stood at attention and began to raise his hand in an elaborate salute. Trump beamed with satisfaction. "Now this is what I call proper respect." But Morrison was already moving. He had spotted the small camera hidden in the server's uniform pocket and realized exactly what was happening. "Stop," Morrison commanded, his voice carrying across the room with military authority. The fake server froze mid-salute, panic flashing across his face. Trump's expression changed from satisfaction to confusion to anger in the span of 3 seconds. "What's the meaning of this?" Trump demanded. Morrison was now standing directly between Trump and the fake server, and every guest in the room was watching the confrontation unfold. "Sir, this man is not a palace employee." The blue drawing room fell completely silent. 40 guests, including British politicians, American business leaders, and international diplomats, all stared at the frozen tableau, Morrison blocking the fake server, Trump looking confused and angry, and Enns recording everything. "What do you mean he's not a palace employee?" Trump demanded. "He was about to give me the proper salute I deserve." Morrison kept his eyes on the fake server, who was now looking desperately toward the nearest exit. "Sir, this man is not on tonight's staff roster. His identification documents are fraudulent." Lady Pemberton appeared beside Morrison, her face calm but her voice sharp with authority. "Security, please escort this individual out immediately." The fake server dropped his tray of champagne glasses, which shattered on the marble floor. "Wait, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Morrison interrupted. "You're trespassing in Buckingham Palace under false pretenses." Trump's face was now bright red. "This is ridiculous. He was just showing proper respect." "Mr. Trump," Lady Pemberton said carefully, "this person was not authorized to be here. He's not a member of palace staff, and he certainly has no authority to render military honors on behalf of His Majesty." As security officers led the fake server away, one of the British politicians in the room, Lord Halifax, approached Trump with a concerned expression. "I'm afraid I don't understand what just happened," Lord Halifax said. "Did you arrange for this person to be here?" Trump looked around the room, realizing that every conversation had stopped, and everyone was listening. "I don't know anything about arrangements. I was just expecting to be treated with proper respect." But Morrison had already found the hidden camera in the fake server's discarded uniform. He held it up for everyone to see. "This was a setup," Morrison announced. "Someone arranged for an unauthorized person to infiltrate palace security and create a fake photo opportunity." The implications hit the room like a wave. Several guests began murmuring to each other in concerned voices. "Are you suggesting," asked Lady Pemberton, her voice dangerously quiet, "that someone attempted to stage a fraudulent military honor ceremony inside Buckingham Palace?" Trump's chief of staff stepped forward quickly. "We had no knowledge of any such arrangement. If someone contacted palace staff claiming to represent us, they were acting without authorization." But Morrison was already putting the pieces together. "The timing is too convenient." The fake server appeared just as Mr. Trump was complaining about not receiving proper military honors. Trump realized that every word was being recorded by multiple phones, and that this conversation would be in tomorrow's newspapers. "I never asked anyone to arrange anything inappropriate." "Then how," asked Lord Halifax, "did this person know to approach you specifically and offer a salute?" The room waited for Trump's answer. In the background, palace security was quietly reviewing the fake server's belongings and finding a phone with recent text messages that would answer everyone's questions. Lady Pemberton received a whispered report from a security officer, and her expression grew even more serious. "Mr. Trump, we've found communications on this individual's phone that suggest he was contacted by someone claiming to represent your interests. They provided detailed information about your complaints regarding military protocol." Trump looked around the room desperately. Every face was watching him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "I want to speak to my legal counsel," he said finally. "That's certainly your right," Lady Pemberton replied. "But first, I think His Majesty would like to speak with you privately." The king appeared in the doorway of the blue drawing room, having been summoned by security. His presence immediately commanded everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the king said calmly, "dinner will be delayed by 30 minutes while we address this security matter." Trump realized that his evening had just taken a turn he hadn't planned for. The king's private study felt much smaller with Trump, his chief of staff Lady Pemberton, and Captain Morrison all present. The fake server's phone lay on the mahogany desk, its screen displaying text messages that told the whole story. "Mr. Trump," the king began, his voice measured but firm, "these messages indicate that someone in your circle contacted a tabloid journalist to arrange tonight's incident." Trump shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your Majesty, I had no direct knowledge of any specific arrangements, but you knew arrangements were being made." The silence stretched for several seconds. Trump's chief of staff was frantically taking notes, clearly preparing for damage control. "I may have mentioned to some friends that I was disappointed with the reception I received at the gate," Trump admitted finally. Lady Pemberton consulted her own notes. "The messages show that your personal assistant received confirmation that a package had been delivered just hours ago." "I don't know what that means." Captain Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, the fake server knew specific details about your complaint regarding military salutes. He knew exactly what to say and when to say it. That information came from somewhere." The king walked to his window again, looking out at the palace grounds where real guards stood at real attention, protecting centuries of tradition and protocol. "Mr. Trump, do you understand what could have happened tonight?" "I'm not sure what you mean." "If we hadn't caught this deception, photographs of a fake military honor would have been published worldwide. Britain's royal protocol would have appeared to bend to pressure. More importantly, it would have been a lie." Trump's face flushed. "I just wanted appropriate respect." "Respect cannot be staged or purchased," the king replied quietly. "It must be earned through conduct that honors the institutions and traditions of the countries you visit." Lady Pemberton cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, we need to decide how to handle the dinner. The other guests are aware something significant has happened." The king considered his options. Cancel the dinner entirely. Proceed as if nothing happened. Make a public statement. "Captain Morrison," the king said, "in your professional opinion, what message does tonight's incident send about respecting British sovereignty?" Morrison chose his words carefully. "Your Majesty, it suggests that some foreign visitors believe our protocols can be manipulated through deception and pressure. It undermines the integrity of palace security and royal tradition." Trump stood up abruptly. "Now wait just a minute. I came here in good faith." "You came here as our guest," the king interrupted, "and someone in your circle attempted to stage a fraudulent ceremony to make it appear that British royal protocol had been violated. I never asked anyone to break any protocols. But you also never stopped them when you learnt arrangements were being made." The room fell silent again. Trump realized that his words were likely being recorded for official palace records. "What happens now?" Trump asked. The king exchanged glances with Lady Pemberton and Morrison. "Now, Mr. Trump, you have a choice. You can join us for dinner and conduct yourself with the dignity appropriate to a former head of state, or you can continue this evening elsewhere." "Are you throwing me out?" "I'm giving you an opportunity to salvage what remains of this visit." Trump looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who represented centuries of British tradition and protocol. People who had not been impressed by his attempts to bend their rules. "And if I stay for dinner, you'll be seated according to proper diplomatic protocol. You'll be treated with courtesy appropriate to a former president. And this incident will be handled as a security matter rather than a diplomatic crisis." Trump realized he had no good options left. The fake salute had backfired completely, embarrassing him in front of international guests, and creating exactly the kind of incident he had tried to avoid. "I'll stay for dinner," he said quietly. "Excellent," the king replied. "Captain Morrison will escort you back to the reception." As they prepared to leave the study, the king added one final comment. "Mr. Trump, real respect is never demanded, it's earned." The state dining room at Buckingham Palace had hosted kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers for over 2 centuries. Tonight it would witness one of the most unusual diplomatic dinners in its history. Trump took his assigned seat, positioned according to strict protocol as a former head of state, neither at the head table nor relegated to the back. His chief of staff sat nearby, still looking nervous about the evening's air events. Captain Morrison stood at his post along the wall, maintaining perfect military bearing while keeping a watchful eye on all the guests. The fake server incident had reminded everyone that palace security was never just ceremonial. King Charles III rose to offer the traditional welcome toast. The room fell silent as 40 guests turned their attention to their host. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather tonight to celebrate the enduring friendship between nations and the importance of mutual respect in international relations." The king paused, making brief eye contact with Trump before continuing. "True diplomacy is built on understanding and honoring each other's traditions, even when those traditions differ from our own." Several guests nodded in agreement, while others glanced discreetly at Trump to gauge his reaction. Tonight reminded us that genuine respect cannot be manufactured or staged. It must be earned through conduct that honors both our hosts and our own national dignity. Trump sat silently, his jaw tight but his expression controlled. As dinner progressed, conversations at the various tables touched on international trade, climate change, and cultural exchange. Trump found himself discussing American-British business relationships with Lord Halifax and several other British politicians. "Mr. Trump," Lord Halifax said during the main course, "I hope you understand that Captain Morrison's actions earlier were not personal. Our military protocols are quite strict. I'm beginning to understand that, Trump replied, though his tone suggested he was still processing the evening's events. At the head table, Lady Pemberton was briefing the king on how the incident would be handled in official records. The individual has been charged with trespassing and fraud, she whispered. His phone contained evidence of contact with multiple tabloid journalists. They were planning to publish photos of the fake salute as if it were Reagan royal protocol. And the journalists? They claim they were simply following a tip about newsworthy palace events. No laws broken on their part, but their credibility is certainly damaged. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison noticed that several guests were discreetly photographing him throughout the dinner. Word had already spread about the guard who had stood his ground against pressure from a former American president. By dessert, the conversation had become more relaxed. Trump seemed to be making an effort to engage appropriately with other guests, though he remained subdued compared to his usual public persona. As the evening wound down, the king approached Trump privately. "Mr. Trump, I hope tonight's experience has been educational." "It certainly has been memorable, Your Majesty. The lesson here isn't complicated. Every nation has traditions and protocols that reflect our values and history. Respecting those traditions is the foundation of international diplomacy." Trump nodded slowly. "I suppose I expected things to work differently." "They work exactly as they should." Captain Morrison followed protocol perfectly. "Our staff maintained security and dignity, and you, despite the earlier incident, conducted yourself appropriately during dinner." As guests began departing, Trump found himself face to face with Captain Morrison near the palace entrance. "Captain," Trump said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Morrison remained at attention. "No apology necessary, sir. I was simply doing my duty." "Your duty was to protect British protocol, even from me." "Yes, sir, that's exactly what my duty required." Trump extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Morrison shook it. "I learned something tonight," Trump said. "Respect isn't something you can demand or arrange. It's something you earn by respecting others first." Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "That's a lesson that serves leaders well, sir." As Trump's limousine pulled away from Buckingham Palace, Captain Morrison returned to his post. The palace would undoubtedly face questions about the evening's events, but the institution's integrity remained intact. Inside the car, Trump sat in silence, processing a lesson in humility that no amount of money or influence could have purchased. The guard had been right all along. In Britain he wasn't in charge. And that had made all the difference.